Hey, folks, welcome. Welcome back to another two for a day, another episode of the Law of Self-Defense Show. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, busy day today. Good news. Good news on the legal merits today. And, of course, here we're gathered again for the second time today, now to talk about Alec Baldwin. This morning, the New Mexico prosecutor announced that Alec Baldwin would be facing 2 counts of manslaughter in the shooting death of Halyna Hutchins. That shooting death happened October 21st, 2021. Today is January 19th, 2023. So we're 13 months after the shooting. I would point out that somebody in the room wrote a piece the day after the shooting pointing out that, well, we don't have much information yet. This could be a terrible accident. It could be manslaughter. And within 3 days after that post, meaning 4 days after the shooting, I had a very detailed legal analysis done in which I argued that this was pretty unambiguously a classic case of reckless, felony, involuntary manslaughter on the part of Alec Baldwin. Got an unbelievable amount of pushback on that analysis, but it's pretty straightforward, and I'm going to go over it all with you again today. Nothing's really changed in the intervening 13 months. It still looks like felony, reckless, involuntary manslaughter to me, as it did immediately after the event. Why it took 13 months for the prosecutor to come to the same decision? I don't know. I mean, certainly some time is warranted, investigating the evidence, speaking to witnesses, but 13 months doesn't seem like it. So most of what I'll share with you today is what I wrote back in October 25th, 2021, because we haven't learned any real new evidence that's inconsistent with a charge of felony, reckless, involuntary manslaughter on the legal merits. And there we are. But in any case, Alec Baldwin did get charged today. It's also worth noting that Gutierrez, the young woman who's the armorer, also is to be charged with 2 counts of manslaughter. Earlier in the, last year, David Hall, the assistant director who handed the pistol to Alec Baldwin on the set, announced it was a cold gun. He's pleaded to a charge of negligent handling of a firearm, suspended sentence. So his criminal woes are fixed and done. No prison time for him. Probably a smart agreement to take under the circumstances. Lets him move on with his life. There are, of course, a flurry of civil suits going around. I've written about most of those. By the way, folks, I've written on this shooting event many times in the last 13 months, and we have aggregated all our Alec Baldwin shooting of Halyna Hutchins content on one webpage you can go to, lawofselfdefense.com/Baldwin. So today we're going to dive into the legal merits of these manslaughter charges against Alec Baldwin. Of course, before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping. Part of that is the, come on, baby, where's my stuff? Where is my stuff? Did I lose my stuff? That would be awkward. Here we go. I managed to lose it, but I know where to find it, folks. Never fear. The Grift Master is here. So, we have coming up on April 15th, our first Law of Self-Defense Advanced Class of the year 2023. We only do 1, sometimes 2 of these a year. We have one coming up on Saturday, April 15th. It's our full day course taught live by me over Zoom. Plenty of time for Q&A, direct interaction with me to make sure all your questions are answered. We cover self-defense, defense of home, defense of occupied vehicle, of business, defense of personal property. We talk about what makes you an attractive target for prosecution. So in other words, what not to do. We talk about interacting with the police in the aftermath of a use of force event. We spend about an hour on that alone. We talk about developing your own personalized, legally sound self-defense strategy. We do all that in a single day. And if you sign up for that class this month in January, you get 50% off the normal registration, save yourself about $100. If you wait until February to sign up, it's only 25% off. March is 10% off. April is 0% off. It's the full price. So if that's at all of interest, I would encourage you to look sooner rather than later. Learn more at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. And of course, we also have our standing opportunity to get a copy of our free book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles, bestseller on Amazon in the criminal law segment. Over 1,200 reviews on Amazon, 5-star rated, but don't buy it on Amazon. They'll charge you 20-something bucks for the book, plus shipping and handling. We only ask you to cover the shipping and handling, less than $9, and you'll get the book for free at lawselfdefense.com/free book. And even if you think you don't need it or you have one, you have a friend or family member who you know could use this information, how to make themselves hard to convict if they're ever compelled to use force against another person in defense of themselves, their family, or their property. And if you'd like a great gift for somebody, you can get that same book in a hardcover edition. Beautiful book in hardcover. lawselfdefense.com/gethard. We'll get you the hardcover. This one's not free. You have to pay for this one. They're too expensive to print up, but it's a wonderful book to give someone as a gift. All right, so let's take a look at where we are. I have, let's see, that's working. Make sure everything is streaming correctly. Yeah, it looks like, did Twitter not work? Nope, it's working. Pin that to my profile. Rumble? Are you working, Rumble? Rumble requires patience, I guess. But Rumble is working as well. Okay, we're streaming on all the relevant platforms, YouTube, Law of Self-Defense members, and on Rumble, which is exactly what we want. If you'd like to ask a question about any of this Alec Baldwin stuff, you're free to do that. If you're watching on YouTube, you need to do that as a super chat, $5 minimum on YouTube, and I'll answer your question. Or be a Law of Self-Defense member and post your question in the member chat on the member dashboard, where we're also streaming this video. Get all your questions answered for free. No super chat cost because you're already a member, and you can be a member right now. Sign up right now for only 99 cents, 2-week trial, 200% money back guarantee. The normal membership fee is only less than $10 a month, only about 30 cents a day, but you can do the 99-cent trial, get unlimited access like a full member at lawselfdefense.com/trial. So you may want to consider doing that. Let's see. So let me pull up the key parts of the, I'm going to open up my analysis from October 25th because I'll be making regular references to that. Let's see if there's any questions in the member dashboard. Oh, if you are a member, please preface your question with the word question in all caps so I can pick it out from the chatter in the background. Let's see. William asks a question. I would like to take the advanced course on Saturday, April 15th, but we'll be out of the country. Can I see it on replay if I pay? Yes, we will make a recording of the class available to watch on replay if you sign up for the class and you can't make the live event. It's available for at least a month, but we're not in a hurry to shut off access to it. So if you needed access for a longer period of time, we'd be happy to provide that. That's the Saturday, April 15th Law of Self-Defense advanced course. So if you can't make the particular Saturday, don't worry about it, really. I mean, you won't have the live component of it, but you'll be able to access the entire course, all the questions I answer in the replay version of the class. Let's see. Brian, Law Self-Defense member Brian asks, I saw that he could face up to 18 months in prison and a $5,000 fine. Seems like a light sentence given the situation. Well, the news is reporting that he's actually facing, Alec Baldwin is facing 2 counts of manslaughter. The analysis I've done focused just on one count of manslaughter. Now, these gets into, in the weed subtleties that vary from state to state. And the news is reporting that Alec Baldwin's looking at up to 5 years in prison. So what we may be dealing with here is the kind of the base count of involuntary manslaughter that I've covered and will cover in this show, that I believe Alec Baldwin is unambiguously liable for criminally. And then there may be an upgraded manslaughter involving a firearm sentencing enhancement that would get him from the normal 18 months for involuntary manslaughter to 5 years for involuntary manslaughter with a gun. I'm not sure because they haven't yet released any official documentation of all this. As soon as I get it, of course, I'll discuss those details. But the news at least is reporting, to the extent you can ever believe the news about any of this, that Alec Baldwin's actually looking at up to 5 years, not merely 15 years. Whether or not he'll actually do any prison time, of course, is a political question. I'll talk on that in a moment. And let me just do a quick check of the super chat stuff before let's see. William, $5 super chat. Thank you very much. He asks, I'm about to sign up for CCW Safe, which you've recommended before. Do you have any coupon codes for them? Yes, I have a long-standing coupon code with CCW Safe. The best way to apply that is lawofselfdefense.com/CCW Safe. Use that URL. Don't go straight to CCW Safe. lawofselfdefense.com/CCW Safe. And if you sign up for an annual membership with them and you use a discount code LSD10, you're supposed to get 10% off your annual membership, the first year of your annual membership. Someone told me this morning that the code wasn't working for them, but it only works on the annual membership. So if you're signing up as a month-by-month member, I don't think the code works. Or the code could be broken, but if it's broken, just call CCW Safe. I expect they'll honor the discount. LSD10 is the Law of Self-Defense discount code for CCW Safe. CCW Safe, for folks who don't know, is one of the commonly misnamed self-defense insurance companies. None of them are insurance companies, in fact. But CCW Safe, among other things, promises to cover your legal expenses if you're involved in a use of force event. And those expenses get very big, very fast, folks. In the cases I consult on, very common for a defendant to burn through a couple $100,000 pre-trial in a killing case, a manslaughter or murder case. In the case we just covered, the self-defense immunity hearing in Florida for Louis Casada, we've been covering it all week. He had 6 expert witnesses at his pre-trial self-defense immunity hearing, and he had very good lawyers, meaning very expensive lawyers. That guy went through a lot of money for that pre-trial hearing. Now, he was granted immunity, so he doesn't have to go to trial, but if he'd lost the immunity hearing, he'd be going to trial and have to hire all those experts again, hire the lawyers again. It all gets very expensive, so it could be helpful to have someone standing behind you with a big wallet to help pay for all that stuff. And that's one of the things CCW Safe does for its members. The other thing it does, by the way, which none of these other organizations do, is it flies in an experienced team of retired homicide detectives to be your detectives, to talk to witnesses, to make sure evidence that's exculpatory is collected. Without them, the only detectives investigating the case effectively work for the prosecution. That's not great. So it can be very good to have that investigative team from CCW Safe fly into the scene and be there working on your behalf. So I'm a big fan. I do a lot of partnering with CCW Safe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, full disclosure and all that. But you can learn more about what they have to offer at lawofselfdefense.com/CCW Safe. I'm personally a member of CCW Safe. That's what I think of them and their team. All right, so where am I? Let me stop that, pop me back up, and we can begin to talk about what's happening here. So this morning, the New Mexico District Attorney, I forget the judicial district, I think it might be the first judicial district in New Mexico. So there's a number of district attorneys in New Mexico. They're organized more or less by counties. This particular one oversees, I believe, 3 counties, Santa Fe County, Taos County, and a third one, the name of which I don't remember. I might have it here. Let me take a look. It's the first judicial district. And the counties are Santa Fe, Los Alamos, and Rio Arriba County. Down in New Mexico, the important part, of course, is she's the relevant DA for the movie set on which this shooting occurred. So this morning, New Mexico District Attorney Mary Carmack Altweiss announced actor Alec Baldwin would be charged with 2 counts of manslaughter over the October 21st, 2021 shooting death of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins, as Baldwin and Hutchins were working together on the set of the low-budget Western movie Rust. And what essentially happened was that Halyna Hutchins, the cinematographer, was behind the camera. The camera was lined up on Baldwin. They were preparing for a shot inside a small church. The scene involved Baldwin quickly presenting a pistol from under his jacket from a holster. He's dressed in cowboy fashion. The pistol is a revolver of cowboy era type of gun, a real gun. Commonly movie sets, believe it or not, mostly use real guns, except perhaps for extras. But anything that would be a real close-up shot, they typically use real guns. And have various rules for trying to ensure safety on the set. And they're pretty good with it. It's relatively rare someone who gets shot on a movie set, particularly shot dead. But the scene involved Baldwin presenting the revolver from under his coat with some rapidity. And he's doing that repeatedly for the camera, for cinematographer Hutchins. And at some point, he presents the gun, and the gun discharges. It discharges a real bullet. That bullet will hits Hutchins in the side, basically the armpit, traverses her entire chest, comes out the other side of her body, and hits another gentleman who was standing nearby, causing him non-fatal injury. So he recovers. But Hutchins was mortally wounded. She would die there. She pretty much dead within moments, really. It's hard to survive a crossbody shot like that, and she didn't. Now, Baldwin, of course, has always claimed that this is a terrible tragedy, but not his fault. He doesn't have criminal liability for this. He has settled a civil suit from the Hutchins family. He did that in October for an undisclosed amount, which is not uncommon. Doesn't necessarily suggest criminal liability, but criminal liability here is unambiguously suggested by the relevant law and facts of the case. Alec Baldwin seems to believe, and many of his fans believe, and certainly the public affairs, public relations management, PR management company he's hired is very aggressive on the internet, arguing that, hey, he's just an actor. He's not responsible for gun safety. That just makes this an accident, at least with respect to Alec Baldwin. He has no responsibility for anything involving his handling of that gun. Strictly speaking, an accident would not involve criminal liability. A genuine accident would not involve criminal liability, meaning an accident in which it was completely unforeseeable that any danger was being created, that anybody could possibly be harmed. If you were asked by your boss to carry a box from one office to another, and you drop the box, and it turns out there's a gun in the box, and it discharges, unknown to you, there's a gun in the box, and it discharges and kills somebody, that would be an accident with respect to you. There would be no way you could have reasonably foreseen that that would be the outcome of dropping the box. Maybe even dropping the box itself was an accident. And a genuine accident doesn't not carry any criminal liability, doesn't carry any civil liability. Now, if you should have known that you were creating a risk of danger to others and harm results, but you didn't actually know, but you should have known, of course, that's determined by other people after the fact, that would constitute negligence. Negligence raises civil liability, but not criminal liability. If you did know, or there's a legal presumption that you did know, that you were creating an unjustified risk of harm to others, not harm results, you're engaged in reckless conduct. And reckless conduct does carry criminal liability because you knew, or we can legally presume that you knew that you were creating an unjustified risk of harm to others, and you did it anyway. You ignored the risk, the harm results. The classic example would be drunk driving. Everybody knows if you're drunk, you get behind the wheel of a car, you're not trying to run anybody over. It's not an intentional act if you harm somebody. You're just trying to get home. But you know, driving drunk, you're creating an unjustified risk of harm to others. You ignore the risk, you drive anyway, you harm somebody, you kill them. It would be reckless manslaughter. Not an intentional killing. You didn't intend to kill them, but you knew you were creating that unjustified risk. You ignored the risk. The death resulted, reckless manslaughter, criminal liability. This also happens even if you didn't actually know, but if we legally presume that you knew, and that legal presumption happens when you're handling inherently dangerous instruments like explosives, like dangerous chemicals like firearms. If you're handling something that's inherently dangerous, we simply presume that you know that there's danger involved. Everybody knows, for example, that guns are dangerous, especially, by the way, Alec Baldwin, who's on the board of a gun control organization that exists solely because guns are dangerous. So certainly he knew guns were dangerous. He knew, in this case, that he was handling a real gun. It's not a prop gun in the sense that it's plastic. He didn't think he was being handed a prop gun in the sense that it was plastic. He knew he was being handed, that he was handling a real firearm. So this decision to charge Baldwin with manslaughter this morning comes only 13 months after my own legal analysis first came out on this. Again, I wrote a piece on this the day after the shooting suggesting, hey, we don't know yet. Could have been an accident, but it could well have been manslaughter because it involved the handling of a gun. Over the next 3 days, more facts were released. And 3 days later, 4 days after the shooting, I did a second, more detailed piece that I'll share again with all of you here today, concluding that this looks rather unambiguously like reckless manslaughter on the information we then had available. And although some new information has been released over the 13 months, none of it changes my legal analysis that Baldwin's conduct in the death of Halyna Hutchins unambiguously qualifies as reckless manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law. And now, 13 months after that was my legal conclusion, the district attorney has finally decided to share that legal conclusion. Good of her to do that. So here what I'll do in today's show is kind of quickly hit the high points of my previous analysis from October 25th to make sure we're all on the same page, discuss some of the new information that's been released that doesn't really change anything, and then I'll take whatever questions we have at the end. So in October 25th, some of the relevant facts that I were presuming to be established for my analysis were the following. One, that it was Alec Baldwin who was handling the gun that fired the projectile. It wasn't somebody else. That the gun discharged because the trigger was depressed and not because of some defect in the weapon. And frankly, I don't really believe that it's necessary the trigger be depressed. I think merely directing the muzzle of the real gun at Hutchins is sufficient to create this unjustified risk of death required for recklessness. In this case, of course, we know the gun was ultimately tested by the FBI, and they were unable to make the gun discharge without the trigger being depressed. In fact, we have video now of Baldwin rehearsing for the scene, presenting the gun from under his coat repeatedly, and every time he does it, his finger's on the trigger. So this notion that he didn't have his finger on the trigger, I think, is nonsense, despite the fact that he's claimed repeatedly that that's the case. In fact, let me see if I have that video to share, that rehearsal video that I can share with you right now. I think I do. Let's see. Yeah, I do. All right, so here it is. Let me share the screen here. So there's no audio here, but this is Baldwin rehearsing for the scene that would ultimately result in the death of Hutchins. And he presents the revolver a couple of times here. You'll notice each time he presents it, his finger is clearly on the trigger. It's only about 30 seconds long, this clip, and I'll try to freeze it. It's in the featured image for today's show. Freeze it when his finger's on the trigger. So here's the first one. Gun comes out, finger's clearly on the trigger. He reholsters so he can do it again. Another rehearsal. He's thinking, getting into his role. He presents the pistol. The revolver comes out. And where's his index finger? Come on. Right there on the trigger again. So I think we can make a reasonable inference that the circumstantial evidence suggests the probability, especially given the FBI testing, that the gun fired because he depressed the trigger on the gun. Whether intentionally or not, he put his finger on the trigger. I'm also presuming that the muzzle of the weapon was, in fact, pointed at Miss Hutchins by Baldwin. We know that to be true. She was not killed by some unpredictable ricochet of the bullet, for example. We know the gun contained a live round. That's the bullet that struck and killed Miss Hutchins. We know that Baldwin had the opportunity to inspect the weapon for live ammo. No one's contested that. He could have checked the gun. That's fundamentally is his act of recklessness. His failure to inspect the gun himself to ensure there was not live ammo in it, especially someone who'd had training in safe gun handling, not only on this movie set, but for decades in his acting career. And of course, we're presuming there was no legal justification for the shooting of Miss Hutchins. She was not attacking him. This was not self-defense. And we're assuming that also, I should say as an aside, I'm assuming that Baldwin didn't intentionally shoot her. If the shooting was intentional, we'd be looking at, some kind of voluntary, intentional killing charge instead of involuntary manslaughter. So we're going to dive into what involuntary manslaughter means under generally and specifically under New Mexico law. So, but I'm assuming those facts are established. I was assuming that on October 25th, 2021, when I did my first analysis of this case, and there's been no facts that emerged since then that change any of those factors or undermine any of those factors. If anything, they've only been reaffirmed. And where there are things like Baldwin attempting to argue that he never actually touched the trigger, there's counter evidence that's compellingly disproves that claim by Baldwin. So let's look at what manslaughter is. Under New Mexico law, there's a specific statute, statute 30-2-3, manslaughter. That's the relevant New Mexico statute on involuntary manslaughter. It actually addresses both voluntary and involuntary manslaughter, but here we're presuming voluntary manslaughter would be a killing done in a rage, a heat of passion. A husband comes home, finds his wife in bed with another man, whips out a gun and shoots him dead. The law says the defense can argue that the heat of passion, the emotion of the moment, actually stripped the killer of the specific intent required for murder, and it mitigates what would have been murder, a cold-blooded killing, into voluntary manslaughter, a hot-blooded killing. Now, it's still intentional, so it's voluntary, but it's a mitigated form of killing. Instead of life in prison without possibility of early release, like murder, you might be looking at 20 years, possibility of parole at some point for voluntary manslaughter. Here, we're presuming the shooting of Hutchins was not intentional, so it's not a voluntary manslaughter. It would be, if it meets the conditions, an involuntary manslaughter. And fundamentally, involuntary manslaughter is reckless manslaughter. It's knowing you're creating, or legally presumed that you're knowing you're creating, because you're handling an inherently dangerous instrument like a gun, knowing you're creating an unjustified risk of death to others, ignoring that risk, and the death results from the conduct. So in the context of involuntary manslaughter, this New Mexico statute 30-2-3 reads, and I'll quote here, manslaughter is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice. Involuntary manslaughter consists of manslaughter committed in the commission of a lawful act that might produce death without due caution and circumspection. So you know you're committing something, you're acting in a way that could kill someone. You know you're creating a risk of death, and you're doing it without due caution and circumspection. You're not taking the steps that would be required to mitigate that risk, to eliminate that risk of death. So you're allowed to do the thing, but if you kill someone without taking due caution and circumspection, that death is an act of involuntary manslaughter. Now, involuntary manslaughter consists of manslaughter committed in the commission of a lawful act that might produce death without due caution and circumspection. And manslaughter of any form is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice. So malice would be the intent to murder, for example. And an unlawful killing, it's just a killing that would not, for example, be justified as self-defense. So Ms. Hutchins here is obviously killed. We stipulated that her killing was not justified, so it was unlawful. And we've stipulated to the benefit of Baldwin that it was without malice, so there was no intent to cause harm. So that meets the conditions of the first sentence of that manslaughter statute, that manslaughter is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice. And again, we're presuming that voluntary manslaughter, heat of passion manslaughter is not at play here. So the key then is to determine whether Baldwin's pointing of the gun at Ms. Hutchins and pressing the trigger without first ensuring that the gun did not contain live ammo, was that the commission of a lawful act which might produce death and was done without due caution and circumspection? If the answer to that question is yes, this is involuntary reckless manslaughter, a felony under New Mexico law. At least minimally good for 18 months in prison, and I believe a $5,000 fine, but it appears there might be firearm sentencing enhancements that would bump that potential prison sentence up to 5 years. So what makes this inherently dangerous? What makes this require due caution and circumspection of unlawful death is not the result? Well, it's that Baldwin is handling a gun. Guns are inherently dangerous instruments, and that's what brings the due caution and circumspection requirement into play. Just like firearms, just like dangerous chemicals, just like dangerous drugs, you know you're handling something that's readily capable of killing someone or causing serious bodily injury. The law presumes that you know this. Nobody knows guns are not dangerous. We all know that, especially, again, Alec Baldwin, who serves on the board of a gun control organization that exists solely because guns are dangerous. So he can't say he didn't know the gun was dangerous. He might have argued he didn't know it was a real gun, but he's never actually made that argument, and it would be a little late now. And generally, of course, as I said, on movie sets, they generally use real firearms for any kind of close scene like this would be here. I'm going to take this down so I'm a little bigger here. All right. So items, what makes an item inherently dangerous? When they can readily cause death or serious bodily injury if they are used carelessly without due care and circumspection. And guns clearly qualify. Heavy equipment, explosives, dangerous drugs, chemicals, all that stuff. If particular and specialized care is not taken, death or serious bodily injury can readily result. Now, it does happen that inherently dangerous instruments exist. We allow them to exist because they're exceptionally useful. Guns are inherently dangerous, but they're very useful for lawful purposes. Explosives, very dangerous, but useful for lawful purposes. Construction, demolition, same with chemicals, same with drugs. So we allow these things to exist in the world. We don't just eliminate them because they have positive externalities as well as negative externalities. But because they have such tremendous possible negative externalities, harm they can cause, we require the people using them to take exceptional care in their handling so we can balance the positive externalities against the negative externalities. And this balance, as a matter of public policy, is achieved by imposing the rule that anyone making use of an inherently dangerous instrument is strictly liable for any unnecessary harm that they cause. And there's no excuses, period. The burden's placed on you when you're using that inherently dangerous instrument to ensure that you take whatever steps are required in order to not cause unnecessary harm. And if you fail to take one of those safety steps and you cause unnecessary harm, that is on you. It's not an accident. It was foreseeable. So what it all boils down to is that for any category of inherently dangerous instrument, there have been rules developed for the safe use of that instrument. Follow the rules, and the value of that inherently dangerous instrument can be realized without much risk of serious harm. And if you follow the rules and harm results, that's generally unforeseeable. That would be an accident, maybe negligence, but not criminal. But if you fail to follow the rules and serious harm results, because then serious harm becomes quite likely if you're not following the established safety rules for that inherently dangerous instrument, then you just bear absolute responsibility. You knew what you should be doing, and you knew by not following the safety rules, you were creating an unjustified risk of death or serious bodily injury. Death or serious bodily injury results, that is the definition of recklessness. Do guns have these kinds of rules? Yeah, they do. And they're well known and well promulgated, especially among movie actors who are trained in the handling of real guns on a set so as not to create unnecessary danger on the movie set. And most of us probably know these fundamental 4 rules of gun safety. They are that all guns are presumed to be loaded until the person handling the gun personally verifies otherwise. So if someone hands you a gun, they say, don't worry about it, it's unloaded. You are not allowed to rely on that representation because it's an inherently dangerous instrument. You have the responsibility of making sure it's safe if you're handling the gun, which means you look to make sure it's not loaded. Second rule, never point the muzzle of a firearm at anything you are not willing to kill or destroy, because that's the risk of pointing the muzzle at something. Third rule, never press the trigger of a firearm unless you intend for it to fire a bullet. Well, who's touching the trigger of a firearm here? Anybody remember? Looks like Alec Baldwin's touching the trigger of a firearm. So he's presumed to intend for a bullet to fire. He knows he's creating that risk. And finally, know your target and what is beyond your target. Now, that last safety rule, that's intended to recognize the dangers presented by bullets that might overpenetrate an object, go over a hill, strike unintended people or things, hunting situations, competitive shooting situations. It's not particularly relevant here because we're presuming that the actual discharge of the gun was unintentional. Those first three safety rules, however, that all guns are presumed loaded, that you don't point the muzzle at something you're not willing to kill or destroy, and that you don't press the trigger unless you intend for the gun to fire, they are acutely relevant here because Alec Baldwin did all these things. He didn't verify that the gun was unloaded. We know that because the gun fired a real round. He did point the muzzle at a woman he had no legal privilege to kill. And we know from sound circumstantial evidence, FBI testing, the video I've already shared with you, that this gun did not fire without the trigger being depressed. It fired in the hands of Alec Baldwin. Overwhelmingly likely he depressed the trigger. Frankly, that's not really necessary. I think he creates the reckless danger, the criminal liability, simply by pointing the muzzle of a gun he has not himself verified as unloaded at Halyna Hutchins, but there's good reason to believe that he depressed the trigger as well. Now, the beautiful thing about the gun safety rules is that they're redundant. So you have to break more than one. You really have to break all of them for something bad to happen. If you only break one, you might have an unfortunate event, but you probably won't kill anybody. So if you fail to verify that the gun's unloaded, it turns out it's loaded, it goes bang. Well, let's say it doesn't go bang, but it turns out it's containing live ammo. Well, if you don't touch the trigger, the gun won't discharge. Right? If the gun doesn't just discharge, you don't need to worry about what's downrange. And even if the gun discharges, if the muzzle's not pointed at anything important, no real harm results. Right? So you have to violate multiple of the rules for a bad outcome to actually occur, a seriously bad outcome like a human death. Unfortunately, that's exactly what Alec Baldwin did here. He violated every one of the rules. And that's precisely why the safety rules exist, right? So when you're handling an inherently dangerous instrument in the form of a gun, bad outcomes, death, serious bodily injury, unjustified bad outcomes can be avoided. So remember the manslaughter statute. It says it's an unlawful killing without malice, without an intent to kill, by doing something that would otherwise be lawful, but it's capable of causing death, and you do it without due care and circumspection. So what's a lack of due care and inspection and handling a firearm? Well, it's violating those 4 rules of gun safety. And he did all of that. He pointed the muzzle at Halyna Hutchins. This was not a ricochet hit. He pressed the trigger in a manner designed to fire the weapon. That's why the weapon fired. And he failed to ensure that the weapon did not contain a live round before he did those things. That's acting without due care, due caution, and circumspection. And he caused her death. That fits the statutory definition of involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law, every day of the week and twice on Sunday. We could also look at the jury instruction for involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law. I'll just read it kind of in summary fashion, but if Baldwin actually goes to trial, and we'll talk about that in a moment, this is what the jury would be instructed. Literally, quote, "For you to find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter, the state must prove to your satisfaction beyond a reasonable doubt each of the following elements of the crime. Alec Baldwin pointed a loaded firearm at Miss Hutchins and depressed the trigger, firing a bullet into her. Unambiguously true. Alec Baldwin should have known of the danger involved by Alec Baldwin's actions. Unambiguously true. Alec Baldwin acted with willful disregard for the safety of others. Well, he knows pointing a gun at someone endangers others, unless you've ensured it doesn't contain live ammo. So unambiguously true. Alec Baldwin's act caused the death of Miss Hutchins. Unambiguously true. And this happened in New Mexico on or about the 21st day of October 2021. Unambiguously true. So where the jury instruction says he had to know of the danger and willfully disregard the danger, that's just the jury instruction version of the due caution and circumspection language of the involuntary manslaughter statute. So once again, it's incontestable, based on the evidence as we know it to be, that Baldwin's conduct meets the legal conditions for the crime of felony, involuntary, reckless manslaughter of Halyna Hutchins. But what about the fact that it wasn't Baldwin who loaded the gun, who put a bullet in the gun? Does that matter? Well, not according to the New Mexico Supreme Court. So there's case law on this. The New Mexico Supreme Court decision is State v. Gilliam. For those who like to look things up, it's 288 Pacific 2nd, P 2nd, 675. That's 288 Pacific 2nd, 675, State versus Gilliam, Gilliam. It involved an appeal of a manslaughter conviction where the claim was that the person who discharged the gun was not the person who loaded it. And the New Mexico Supreme Court rejected that appeal and said explicitly, quote, "It could have made no difference to the trial of a charge of involuntary manslaughter as to who loaded the gun. It doesn't matter who loaded the gun. All that is necessary to establish from involuntary manslaughter by the use of a loaded weapon is that a defendant had in his hands a gun which at some time had been loaded and that he handled it without due caution and circumspection and that death resulted." Close quote. Does that describe what happened with Alec Baldwin and Halyna Hutchins? Yes. So it doesn't matter who loaded the gun. All this talk about whether the live round on the gun came from this source or that source or some other source, it's irrelevant for purposes of determining whether Baldwin's shooting of Miss Hutchins was involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law. All that matters in the context of involuntary manslaughter through unsafe handling of a firearm is that the defendant, again, to quote the State versus Gilliam, New Mexico Supreme Court, quote, "The defendant had in his hands a gun which at some time had been loaded and that he handled it without due caution and circumspection and that death resulted." Close quote. That's Baldwin. That's the Baldwin shooting of Halyna Hutchins. Now, if someone else loaded the gun with a live round on a movie set, they're not supposed to do that. The assistant director handed the gun to Alec Baldwin, called out cold gun to suggest that it wasn't loaded with live ammo. Other people may have done other things wrong in this case. Does that relieve Alec Baldwin of his own criminal liability? No. This is all smoke and mirrors by Baldwin's legal team, by his PR, public relations repair team that he's obviously hired, because I see them coming at me on social media all the time when I talk about this case, just making up nonsense to explain away Baldwin's attempt to explain away Baldwin's criminal liability for the death of Halyna Hutchins, which, by the way, is what I would do too. If I had a client in Baldwin's position, I would urge him to hire this kind of firm as well. But that's propaganda. That's not legal merit. And almost certainly there are other people here who bear criminal and or civil liability here. We already know, for example, the assistant director has pleaded to a negligent handling of a firearms charge, suspended sentence and no prison time, but a crime. So he's accepted criminal responsibility for his role in handing Alec Baldwin this gun, calling it a cold gun. The Gutierrez, the young woman who's the armorer, she's also being charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter here. That was announced this morning as well. So she's facing criminal liability. So it's quite possible that lots of people involved here have their own criminal and or civil liability for this tragic outcome. But none of that clears Alec Baldwin of his criminal liability. What about the fact that he's an actor? Well, he's an actor. He's on a set. They just play pretend all the time. Actors, they're always handling guns and pointing guns at each other and blah, 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 blah. Well, of course, the reality is that actors do often point guns at each other in various roles. Sometimes they have to. Sometimes they point guns at their own heads, right? Well, here's the thing, though. It's possible to do that with due caution and circumspection. And that's why the millions of times that actors are pointing real guns at each other in movie sets, they almost never shoot each other or themselves. These kinds of outcomes are extremely rare in Hollywood because Hollywood has very well established safety guidelines for the handling of real guns on a movie set, including ultimately placing the final responsibility in the hands of the actor holding the gun. That's explicit in the guidelines published for the movie industry, for the actors union. And if you don't believe me, you don't have to. I'm not an actor in Hollywood, but I did a lengthy interview with someone who is, not Alec Baldwin, but Adam Baldwin. You may know from Firefly, from Chuck, from The Last Ship, from lots of great work. I'm pleased to say Adam's a personal friend of mine, has been for quite some time, and he agreed to do an interview for the Law of Self-Defense Community where he talked about all this. He shared with me the printed guidelines for actors and the safe handling of guns. By the way, Adam tells me that he and the Baldwin brothers, Alec and the other brothers, I can't even remember their names, are distant relations, generations back from Ireland, I presume, but nothing in living memory for sure. So they're not really related in any meaningful sense. But Adam Baldwin gave a great interview talking about how he wouldn't, for example, and other actors he knows, routinely inspect the guns that they're handling to make sure they're not loaded with live ammo before they point them at a fellow actor. But we're supposed to believe Alec Baldwin when he says, oh, that's never done. Not the case. If you're a Law of Self-Defense member, you can find that. Let's see, where do I have that interview? Did I pull it up? Oh, if you just go to, if you're a Law of Self-Defense member, you go to lawofselfdefense.com/Baldwin. I've aggregated all my coverage of this shooting, including the interview with Adam Baldwin. You can see that. That's what that looks like there. So this is he and I hanging out this past summer in Santa Monica, where he lives. So I would encourage you to do that. That was a really fun interview to do. So whether or not, so on the legal merits, Alec Baldwin's conduct here clearly meets the elements, the conditions for felony, reckless, involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law. That's unambiguous. Whether he would be charged with that crime was not really a legal question, but a political question. Prosecutors have really unlimited discretion on whether or not they want to charge or not. Alec Baldwin, of course, is a well-known lefty. This is a very, New Mexico itself is pretty liberal, and this is a liberal part of New Mexico, this whole Santa Fe, Taos area of New Mexico. And this is the elected district attorney from that liberal area. My understanding is she's quite a lefty herself. So Alec Baldwin's on her team. That can discourage the bringing of charges. Shouldn't play a role, but humans being humans, it often can. Also, this part of New Mexico is rather desperate to get more Hollywood productions in their area. It's good money for the locality. It's good, good social opportunities for lefty politicians in those areas. They get to take pictures with movie stars. They love that kind of stuff. And so there'd be a disincentive for her to charge Alec Baldwin if the prosecutor believed that would discourage other Hollywood actors, producers, companies from coming to the Santa Fe Taos area to film productions. So she wouldn't want to do that from a political perspective. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's up to her. It's not like Halyna Hutchins was a constituent of hers. Her family, Halyna, lived in California, not New Mexico. So it was really ultimately a political question. 13 months had gone by. I would not have been surprised if Alec Baldwin was not charged. Again, he ought to be charged on the legal merits, but the political question is a political question. Well, this morning we had the political question, at least that political question, answered when she announced that she was in fact bringing 2 charges of involuntary manslaughter against Alec Baldwin. Presumably one, the standard reckless manslaughter charge that would be good for 18 months in prison, and a second count with some kind of firearms enhancement, good for up to 5 years in prison. But now that that political question has been answered, we have another political question, and that is, does this mean Alec Baldwin will actually go to prison? Well, that's still an open question. I mean, first of all, he may not be tried in court at all. So just because he's charged doesn't mean he's going to trial. He might be able to work out a favorable plea deal, like David Hall, the assistant director, did. David Hall ultimately pled to negligent handling of a firearm and received a suspended sentence. So no prison time at all. Might the prosecutor here charge Alec Baldwin with this involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts, and then have him plead to something, either a misdemeanor, maybe a felony, but in any case, something with just a suspended sentence, no prison time? Yeah, that's up to her if she wants to do that. That's within her discretion. I mean, ultimately, I guess a judge has to sign off, but judges don't generally contest these kinds of deals once prosecutors have made them. Now, if Alec Baldwin, is actually tried in a courtroom on this charge of manslaughter, on the legal merits, he's extremely likely to be convicted, but that still doesn't necessarily mean he'd go to prison. My expertise is use of force law, what's possible to happen legally, not sentencing, especially not New Mexico sentencing law. And sentencing laws vary tremendously from state to state. But generally speaking, the sentencing judge, typically the trial judge, but the sentencing judge has a lot of discretion in sentencing. Remember Kim Potter, right? Shot Dante Wright, was looking at up to 20 years when she was convicted of manslaughter in that case, and reckless manslaughter, by the way, which a totally inappropriate conviction because her conduct was not reckless. She did not know that she was creating an unjustified risk of death, and under the circumstances could not reasonably have known. She believed she had a taser in her hand. She did not know she had a gun in her hand. And if you believe you have a taser in your hand, you don't know that you're creating a risk of death because tasers don't create a risk of death in any typical application. The pistol certainly does, and that's what she actually had in her hand, and that's what discharged and killed Dante Wright. But she was basically, Kim Potter was convicted of reckless manslaughter without any requirement for recklessness. In fact, the prosecution argued to the jury that he had no obligation to prove to the jury that Kim Potter knew she had a gun in her hand. Well, he did, but he basically lied to the jury. The judge let him get away with it, and Kim Potter was convicted as a result. But she ultimately received an extremely light sentence for manslaughter. She was sentenced to 18 months. She'd already served 4, so effectively an additional 14 months when she could have had 20 years. And I can't help but wonder if the judge in that case, Judge Chu, realized that she'd let an error go by, this misstatement of what's required for reckless manslaughter, that the conviction was ultimately unjust because of that, and basically covered her tracks by giving Kim Potter such a light sentence, so light a sentence that it's not worth appealing. So no appellate court would ever identify the error that she made as judge in that case. But in any case, that's an example of the discretion, the range that a sentencing judge may have in deciding whether or not someone goes to prison. So even if Baldwin were convicted, that doesn't necessarily mean that he'd go to prison. That's largely another political decision that would be made by the judge in the particular case. But if convicted, he would be looking, per news reports, at up to 5 years in prison. That's no joke for anybody. And it's really no joke for someone of, Alec Baldwin's not a spring chicken, right? How old is Alec Baldwin? Hope it turns out he's my age because I look way better. Oh, no, he's older than me. Not by much. 6 years older than me. He's 64. I'm 58 as of last month. I still think I look way better than Alec Baldwin. No offense to Alec Baldwin fans, I guess. But 64, if he's, the trial would take place in the next year. He might be 65. If he's convicted, sentenced to 5 years, 65 to 70. Anybody want to spend those years in prison? So no joke, but it's not like he didn't earn it. All he had to do to avoid the risk was take a moment to ensure the gun he pointed at another human being didn't have live ammo in it. That's all. That's all he had to do. And he didn't. And Halyna Hutchins died as a result. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is involuntary manslaughter. All right. Let me take a look at any questions that might have come in. Let's see. Law Self-Defense member asks, William asks, what's your thoughts on the ATF with their ruling on pistol braces? I talked about this in yesterday's show, I think, or the day before. Folks, I just think all these laws, any gun control law preemptively applied to law-abiding, mentally sound American citizens is facially unconstitutional. I think they're all nonsense. They all are a violation on our civil, constitutional, human, natural rights. But that won't keep the government from putting you in prison if you break their rules. So, but if you're asking my personal opinion and my legal opinion, I think they're all nonsense. But you have to obey them as long as they're on the books, as long as they're being enforced, or you risk going to jail for a long time, and federal time in this case. And that's real time. You have to do almost 100% of federal time. Let's see. After I do the questions, by the way, folks, I will scroll through a couple of the news reports on this so we can cover some of the details that have emerged over the last 13 months, and I can just speak to them briefly because none of them really change anything. Let's see. Law Self-Defense member Brian. By the way, the Law Self-Defense members, they get to ask all the questions they want without having to pay anything for a super chat. And their membership is only about 30 cents a day, less than $10 a month. And they get to ask an unlimited amount of questions in the member chat, and it gets answered. You can get your own membership for just 99 cents, 2-week trial, unlimited access to our members only content. Ask as many questions as you want at lawofselfdefense.com/trial. If you don't like it, we'll refund 200% of your 99 cents. If you stay a member, it just converts over to the normal less than $10 per month membership fee. You can take advantage of that at lawofselfdefense.com/trial. So back to the member questions. Let's see. Question. Brian says, I saw that he could face up to 18 months in prison and a $5,000 fine. Seems like a light sentence. Yeah, it really is. Just for even just normal run-of-the-mill involuntary manslaughter, 18 months doesn't seem like much. But again, the news is reporting he could be facing up to 5 years. That would explain the second count. Why 2 counts of manslaughter when there's only 1 victim? It's probably a second version that has a gun sentencing enhancement that bumps the 18 months up to 5 years, is what I expect. Let's see. Law Self-Defense member Kyle says, comment, CCW Safe does not have a cap on legal costs, even if an appeal is needed. Yes, that's another reason CCW Safe is better, in my opinion, than many of its competitors, like a USCCA or a Law Shield or whatever. CCW Safe covers your legal expenses, period, with no cap. They actually have their own, they're an independent offshore insurance entity. A captured insurance entity is the legal term for it. That backs them on their ability to provide you with effectively unlimited coverage of your legal expenses. And they don't cut you off from coverage, even if you're convicted at trial. If you appeal a conviction, they pay for the cost of your appeal. If you win on appeal and it gets remanded for a second trial, they cover the cost of the second trial. It's pretty good. To my knowledge, nobody else does that. Let's see. Law of Self-Defense member Tax Pro Pam says, Andrew, do you have the statute on lawofselfdefense.com? We do, Pam. I mean, it's go to Law of Self-Defense. If you're a member, go to lawofselfdefense.com/Baldwin, and it's listed and probably hyperlinked in the October 25th, 2021 legal analysis, and probably other Baldwin related blog posts I put up. So you can find it there, or it's or just what was the number I cited? 30-2- let me see if I still have it up here. I'm sure I do. 30-2-3. If you just Google New Mexico 30-2-3, I'm sure the statute will pop right up. Let's see. All right, so that looks like the member questions. Let me take a look at the super chat situation. Refresh that screen. All right, Atomic Blast, $20 super chat. Thank you, very, very generous. I think it is 2 counts total, 1 for Alec and 1 for Hannah, not 2 counts for Alec. I might be wrong on that, but that's what I thought from reading the news. I think I read it as 2 counts for each of them. And that would be explained by the 5-year possible sentence the media is talking about. The trouble is the media is largely, sorry for any journalists out there, the media consists largely of idiots who, when they don't have a political agenda, simply don't know what they're writing about. So it comes out as garbled nonsense. And often they do have a political agenda, so they're deliberately misreporting the facts and the law. So you simply can't really rely on what they're saying. I am keeping my eyes open for any official court filings by the prosecutor here, and that would make explicit what's actually being charged. But it's always risky to rely on anything the media has to say about any use of force case. I've literally never seen them get it right. Brian, super chat, $5. Brian Schultz. Yep, if your finger is on the trigger and the gun goes off, it's no longer called accidental discharge for a reason. It was your own negligence. I would argue if you do it in such a way that you're creating an unjustified risk of death, and unless you're out in the woods or on the ocean, if there's other people involved in the area, you are, that it's not merely negligence, not merely only civil liability, but recklessness, criminal liability, because you know you're creating a risk or you're handling an inherently dangerous instrument, and are presumed to know, legally presumed to know, you're creating a risk of unjustified death to others and ignoring that risk. Bonnie Blues, 2A, $10 super chat. What's the difference, if any, between involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide? So that's why I like to use the legal terms of art carefully defined. So there's really 4 kind of mental states we're talking about here. One is a genuine accident. No reasonable person could have foreseen the harm happening. There is no liability, either civil or criminal liability, for a genuine accident. Next level up in terms of responsibility is negligence. You didn't know that you were creating a risk, but you should have known. You were careless. You weren't thoughtful. You should have known you were creating a risk. That creates civil liability. That's negligence. Creates civil liability, but not criminal liability. The next level up, you knew you were creating a risk, or you were handling an inherently dangerous instrument, and we legally presume you knew you were creating the risk, and you ignored the risk and the harm resulted. That's recklessness. That's criminal liability now. And then, of course, there's intentional acts, and that would make the killing a murder. When you see phrases like a criminally negligent homicide, you need to understand that the 2 words criminally negligent are being used as a synonym for reckless. It's not negligent, it's criminally negligent. Criminally negligent is just recklessness. It's just a different way of saying the same thing. So that would be a reckless homicide. It would be an involuntary manslaughter. I don't like it when the legal system uses these terms in sloppy ways. As a practical matter, our criminal laws are enforced on a state level. Every state has its own criminal statutes and jury instructions and case law. And so most criminal proceedings are happening within a single state. So everybody kind of understands what the words mean. You don't end up with the kind of ambiguity I'm talking about. When I talk about these cases, I'm talking to thousands of you all living in different states. So I have to be particularly precise in my legal terminology. But involuntary manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide are the same things. They're just, the mental state is the same. It's a reckless mental state. It's criminal because it's not mere negligence, it's recklessness. Brian Schultz, another super chat from Brian, $5. Thank you very much. Do you know about the shooting during The Crow? Similar outcome, very different circumstances. Might be something good to research and discuss. I of course I've looked it up, but I forget the details. My understanding there was that there was actually something lodged in the barrel. The Crow was a movie in which Brandon Lee, I believe Bruce Lee's son, was killed by a gun discharging. But I believe in that case, it wasn't that there was a live round in the gun. There was an obstruction in the barrel that was not checked for. And so when the blank was fired, it hurled the obstruction out of the barrel into the chest of Brandon Lee and killed him. It's not that hard to check for an obstruction in the barrel, folks. You just put a rod down the barrel. So, but I that was somewhat before my time, the Brandon Lee killing in The Crow. Let's see. Law Self-Defense member Otto Rommel, $10 super chat. Thank you very much. He says, is Alec Baldwin a Law Self-Defense Platinum member? No, Alec Baldwin is not. Adam Baldwin is, for sure, but Alec Baldwin is not. Let's see. Any more member questions? Yeah, Tax Pro Pam, Law Self-Defense member. Question, can you please explain again how the armorer can be charged with manslaughter when she did not pull the trigger? Well, the argument there would be that it's her responsibility to make sure there's no live ammo on the set. And there was live ammo on the set. Obviously, there was a live round in the gun that killed Halyna Hutchins. And now the news is reporting, this is additional information, that there was live round on the table where the guns were being transiently stored between shoots, between film shoots. And apparently there was a live round in a belt loop on a belt being worn by Adam Baldwin. So, yeah, it was just sloppy. It's a low budget film. They hired a young woman. This woman, Gutierrez, her father is famous as an armorer in Hollywood. But he's very expensive and quite getting old at this point, frankly. But Fel Reed is the father. Very, very famous Hollywood armorer, has done tons and tons and tons of movies. But this is the daughter. She's just getting into the business. They got her cheap. And just because her father may be super competent doesn't mean the daughter is. So the state would be arguing that, hey, it was her responsibility to ensure there was no live ammo on the set. She didn't do that. And in fact, she knew there was live ammo on the set and she wasn't doing anything about it. And that was her act of recklessness. Her failure to meet her obligations, her duties in ensuring no live ammo on the set created an unjustified risk of death. She knew that risk existed. She ignored the risk and death resulted. That would be the argument for involuntary manslaughter in that context that I would expect the prosecution to pursue. Oh, good. So apparently the DA has provided an explanation. Let's see. There's a press release here on the Facebook page for the First Judicial District Attorney. That's nice to know. I guess I'll have to follow her. I'm not currently signed in. Let's see. If I don't really use Facebook much anymore, folks. So, you know what? I'm not going to sign in. It looks like I can view this Facebook post without signing in. I am going to remove my apparent username and password, though. Then I'll pop this up on the screen. So let's see. Share. And we'll see what the district attorney has to say. And I can see she's already taking political heat for this decision to charge. Okay, let's see. New Mexico First Judicial District Attorney Mary Carmack Altweiss announced on Thursday that in keeping with her commitment to pursue justice for all victims, to hold everyone accountable, her office before the end of the month will file criminal charges in the Rust film shooting. Rust actor and producer Alec Baldwin and armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed will each be charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter in the death of Halyna Hutchins. Assistant Director David Halls, that's the guy who handed Alec Baldwin the gun, said it was a cold gun, has signed a plea agreement for the charge of negligent use of a deadly weapon, suspended sentence, 6 months probation. A copy of the plea agreement will be available after it's filed. Okay, that's fine. No charges will be filed specific to the non-fatal shooting of Rust director Joel Souza. You could easily make a reckless endangerment charge there, folks. Not manslaughter, because, of course, Souza was not killed. Let's see. After a thorough review of the evidence and the laws of the state of New Mexico, I've determined there is sufficient evidence to file criminal charges against Alec Baldwin and other members of the Rust film crew. Carmack Altweiss said, the DA. That's certainly true, as we've discussed. There are 2 charges. So, but Baldwin and Gutierrez-Reed will be charged in the alternative with the 2 counts of manslaughter, meaning that a jury would decide not simply if they were guilty, but under which definition. The first charge can be referred to as simply as involuntary manslaughter. That's the charge I've been discussing since days after the shooting. For this charge to be proved, there must be underlying negligence. Well, okay. Again, properly understood, there needs to be underlying recklessness. Negligence is not enough for criminal liability. Under New Mexico law, involuntary manslaughter is a 4th-degree felony, punishable by up to 18 months in jail and a $5,000 fine. This charge also includes the misdemeanor charge of negligent use of a firearm, which would likely merge as a matter of law. Yeah, that sounds about right. The other charge is involuntary manslaughter in the commission of a lawful act. This charge requires proof that there was more than simple negligence involved in a death. I think they're just getting confused here. Also a 4th-degree felony, punishable by up to 18 months in jail and a $5,000 fine. This charge includes a firearm enhancement or added mandatory penalty because a firearm was involved. The firearm enhancement makes the crime punishable by a mandatory 5 years in jail. So that's, as I expected, it's kind of traditional involuntary manslaughter is 1 count. The second count is voluntary manslaughter with a gun enhancement, bumps it up from 18 months to 5 years. If any of these people, Alec Baldwin, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer, or David Halls, the assistant director, had done their job, Halyna Hutchins would be alive today. It's that simple, said Andrea Reeb, the special prosecutor appointed by the DA in this case. The evidence clearly shows a pattern of criminal disregard for safety on the Rust film set. In New Mexico, there's no room for film sets that don't take our state's commitment to gun safety and public safety seriously. Ironically, it sounds like the prosecutor here is she's assigning more value to her gun safety political views than she is to any appeal of Alec Baldwin, even though, ironically enough, Alec Baldwin is or was on the board of a gun safety, quote unquote, gun control organization. Let's see. The charges will be filed by the end of the month. A summons will be issued. First appearance will follow the summons. That can be done virtually by Zoom. And first appearance dates are set by the court. Then they'll have a preliminary hearing, and a judge will act as a grand jury. Well, that's just going to return an indictment in effect. Indictments are always the result of whatever the prosecutor really wants. We don't have a real probable cause preliminary hearing status in America, unfortunately. We ought to. Let's see. Once charges are filed, more detailed paperwork will be available online through the court that details the evidence the DA and the special prosecutor's site. And as that's filed, folks, I'll be happy to cover all that in more detail. I don't think it'll be any different, really, than what we already have. Let's see. Law Self-Defense member Kyle. Remember, members get to ask as many questions as they want for free, folks. No $5 super chat requirement for Law Self-Defense members. Kyle asks, the Crow was where they shot close up with dummy rounds. One was loose, and when they changed it out for blanks, a slug from a dummy stayed in the chamber. Okay, if you say so. I don't remember the details. Law Self-Defense member Paul in Florida. Does a plea agreement equal a permanent felony record? A plea agreement is the same as a conviction. So whatever you plead to, it's a conviction. So if you plead to a felony, it's a felony conviction. That's all. If this goes to trial, would it be live streamed? Maybe. We had the Dean Cummings New Mexico trial. Dean Cummings was the guy who was thinking about buying some land by a New Mexico resident, ended up in a fight with that resident while living in a cabin on the land with permission, shot and killed the owner of the land, and was tried for, was it murder? I guess it was murder. We covered that trial. It was live streamed from New Mexico. So at least some criminal trials are live streamed. It might be at the discretion of the judge. So we'll just have to see what happens. If it's live streamed, I guarantee you I'll be covering it for sure. In fact, even if it's not live streamed, if it actually goes to trial, if they decide they're not going to let cameras in the courtroom, I may just ride the motorcycle down there, get a hotel room and stay for the trial, get admission that way. Of course, I still wouldn't be able to live stream from the courtroom, but at least I'd be able to report my personal view of what was the proceedings in the courtroom. Let's see. Law Self-Defense super chats. Check out the super chats. I saw a couple come in while I was talking, and then we'll do the news articles. Content of character, $20 super chat. Thank you very much. Says, since Alec Baldwin was on the board of a gun safety organization, do you think that would likely be used against him in court to demonstrate that he should have been much more conscious of gun safety while on the set? Yeah, sure. I would definitely use it. Absolutely. I mean, he's probably made statements about why he's on the board. What's his commitment to gun safety? Because guns kill so many, it just reaffirms what we all already know, that guns are dangerous. So he would have known the gun was dangerous when he pointed it at Halyna Hutchins, for sure. All right, so let's see. I had pulled up a couple of news reports. What's this one? This is the New York Times. So it's not, folks, I'm going to pick this one, not because I think there's anything great about the New York Times, but because they are the New York Times, they tend to get, it opens doors. It opens doors. So let's take a look at what the New York Times has to report today. Alec Baldwin will be charged with involuntary manslaughter in Rust killing a gun. I love how passive voice the New York Times gets, the liberal media gets when they're reporting about their friends, about people on their team. It gets very passive voice. It's not just Alec Baldwin shot Halyna Hutchins. It's a gun. A gun. The gun did it. A gun that Mr. Baldwin was rehearsing with went off. It just went off. Killing like it was a rabid dog. It's self-animated. The gun self-animated and discharged itself. A gun that Mr. Baldwin was rehearsing with went off, killing the film cinematographer. The armor responsible for weapons on set also faces manslaughter charges. Okay. Let's see. Alec Baldwin charged with involuntary manslaughter for handling the gun. He just handled it. That's all. Handling the gun that discharged. Very passive voice. Not for Alec Baldwin discharging a gun, for handling the gun that discharged. Like if you were handling a dog and it bit somebody, that's not your fault. The dog bit him, not you. Handling the gun that discharged on the set of Rust, killing its cinematographer, as will also charge the movie's armorer who loaded the gun. Prosecutors in New Mexico announced on Thursday. They said they would charge Baldwin with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter. We already discussed that, saying he had a duty to ensure the gun and the ammunition were properly checked and that he should never have pointed it at anyone. Yeah. So generally in the movies, they actually, although very often looks like they're pointing guns directly at each other, I'm told by Adam Baldwin and other actual actors in Hollywood, they typically point the guns a bit off to the side, and you can't tell in the film shoot, that they're doing that. So even if the worst should happen, the bullet would miss. You should not point a gun at someone you're not willing to shoot, the district attorney for Santa Fe County, Mary Carmack Altweiss, said in an interview. That goes to basic safety standards. Just like I talked about in my October 25th, 2021, 4 days after the shooting, talked about the basic safety standards. The criminal charges were a remarkable development in the career of Mr. Baldwin, 64. Well, I don't think this is a development in a career. It's like getting another role is development in a career. If I committed manslaughter against someone, would that be a development of my legal career? Mr. Baldwin, both a producer and a lead actor in Rust, has long denied culpability. Well, of course he has. Noting that he had been told the weapon he was rehearsing with did not contain live ammunition, that he had no duty to check. Well, he's free to believe that, but that's not the law. Someone is responsible for what happened. I can't say who that was, but I know it's not me, he said in a television interview. Most of us probably saw that interview. It was not a good idea for him to do that interview. He also said he was simply following directions on where to point the gun when it went off. You think it's permissible for you to follow directions to knowingly create an unjustified risk of death to someone? No. Nope. You think if Alec Baldwin, if the script had called for him to point the gun against his own head, he would have checked it to make sure it didn't have live ammo first? You think? Of course, Mr. Baldwin's lawyer, Luke Nikas, is unhappy with this event, of course, as you would expect. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, Fel Reed is her father, the famous Hollywood armorer. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the young woman who was the armorer on the set of this low-budget Western. Her lawyer is also unhappy with the charges, as one would expect. David Hall's got a suspended sentence. He's the one who handed Baldwin the gun, took a plea. Can put that matter behind him now. The prosecutor said they had determined it was part of film industry standards for actors to ensure that the guns they use on set were safe for them to handle. Yes, folks, if you look at my interview with Adam Baldwin on our blog, members can find that interview at lawselfdefense.com/Baldwin. He talks about that, about their training. Mr. Baldwin pushed back on that idea. Good luck pushing back on that idea. Andrea Reeb, a special prosecutor on the case, said Gutierrez-Reed was also responsible for ensuring guns on the set did not contain live rounds. There's a very robust argument to be made there. We're definitely trying to definitely make it clear that everyone's equal under the law, including A-list actors like Alec Baldwin. Is he still an A-list actor? I don't know. Was he ever an A-list actor? If a jury found Mr. Baldwin or Mr. Gutierrez-Reed guilty, it would choose between the 2 manslaughter charges. The more serious one includes a firearm enhancement and a mandatory 5-year sentence. The other charge carries a sentence of up to 18 months, as we already discussed. The prosecutors had been waiting for a final report from the sheriff's office, which was delivered in October. Listen, folks, that report got delivered when the prosecutor said she wanted it delivered. I don't for a minute think the prosecutors, the sheriff's office spent a full year doing this. I suppose it's theoretically possible. In the aftermath of the shooting, the authorities found 5 additional live rounds on the set, including on top of the cart, where props like this gun were kept, and in a belt that Mr. Baldwin was wearing as a costume piece. The investigation by the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office did not answer a key question of the case: how live ammunition ended up on a movie set. Yeah, I mean, if I ran movies, I'd like to know, because you'd like to put in more safety guidelines to prevent this from happening. But how the ammo showed up is not relevant to the criminal liability here. Not for Baldwin. Maybe for Gutierrez. Miss Reeb, the special prosecutor, said how the bullets arrived on set. We may never answer that question. The investigation centered on those who supplied and physically handled guns and ammunition for the film, some of whom pointed their fingers at colleagues in statements to reporters or interviews with investigators, just like Alec Baldwin pointed his finger. I know someone's responsible. It just ain't me. The tragedies resulted in several lawsuits. Yes, that's all true. The lawsuit of the Hutchins family against Baldwin was settled last October, though, for an undisclosed amount. I've heard reported. During interviews with the sheriff's office, crew members described a lack of consistent meetings devoted to on-set safety. The night before the shooting, most of the camera crew had quit over complaints about overnight lodging and other concerns. In an email to other people on set informing them he was leaving, Lane Looper, the head of the camera department, wrote that the filming of gunfight scenes was played very fast and loose, citing 2 accidental weapons discharges. So again, people knew that the danger was being created. Let's see. I know 1,000% I'm not responsible for what happened to her, Mr. Baldwin told an investigator in a phone call following the shooting. Well, you may think not, but you are. The DA, Carmack Altweiss, said FBI analysis of the gun showed conclusively that the trigger had to be pulled for the gun to discharge. The prosecutor said the people they intended to charge this month would not be arrested, but would be expected to appear for a virtual court appearance. That would be in response to the summons. A judge in New Mexico will then oversee a preliminary hearing on the charges and determine whether there is probable cause to move forward. There's always, under the very low standard applied in America today, there's always probable cause to move forward. Let's see. Finger pointing. The husband of Miss Hutchins agreed to settle his wrongful death suit against the Rust production. So I don't know. Maybe there's still a suit pending against Baldwin. I don't know. I don't really cover the civil stuff, folks. I know Baldwin has filed suit against Gutierrez, the armorer, and some other people. I covered that in a blog post some months ago. And that's it. So nothing really new. I mean, we have some new information, like there was a live round on the cart where the prop guns were held. There was a live round on Baldwin's belt, but none of that's helpful to Baldwin. None of that mitigates his criminal liability in this case. All right, one last look for questions, and then I will wrap up. Let's see. Linda, law self-defense member Linda asks, if Baldwin shut up after the incident, could he have possibly avoided this? I don't think so. No, because the facts are too unambiguous. The only thing I can imagine that would save him here would be if he had said from the start, I thought this was not a real gun. I thought this was a replica firearm not capable of discharging a bullet. So when I pointed the muzzle at Halyna Hutchins, I did not know. I had reason to believe I was not knowingly creating a risk of death, because I didn't believe this was an object that could fire a bullet. If he had said that, then maybe it would have been negligence, because in fact it was, of course, a live gun. That's how it fired the round. So maybe he was negligent in not ensuring. That might have been something he could have argued, but he threw that away from the very beginning. But you can't claim that 13 months later. You would have said that earlier. And it's normal for movie sets to have live guns on set, real guns on set, I should say. So yeah, I don't think, that's not to say that talking didn't hurt him. It was not helpful for him to talk. But the evidence against them on involuntary manslaughter is so unambiguous, regardless of whether he kept his mouth shut. I just don't think it would have helped. But he can't help himself. He's just a chatterbox. These people, these wealthy, arrogant Hollywood type people, they just think things are always given to them. They're always getting breaks. They're always getting special treatment. So he probably just assumed this would be like another normal day in his life, and he just gets special treatment. By the way, when he was first talking to detectives immediately after the shooting, he didn't know Halyna Hutchins was dead. So he didn't know how much trouble he could be in legally. So that's when he would have had to claim, really from the very beginning, that he didn't even know it was a real gun. And maybe if he'd known that she was dead, he would have thought to have said that. But at the time, he thought she was still alive, and he didn't make that claim. And if you don't make that claim from the beginning, it's not credible later on. Let's see. I did see another super chat come in. YouTube does not provide a great way to do this. Let's see. Yes. Well, I can't pronounce the name. It's an acronym of some kind, but a $5 super chat ends in the number 2. Thank you very much. Says, if the case goes to trial, will it be difficult to convince the jury of lay people that this was not simply an accident? No, it's not. It's not difficult. I mean, you have to explain to them where the legal thresholds are. What's the difference between accident, negligence, and recklessness? The judge will do that in the jury instructions, probably not just at the end, but at the start. And the attorneys, if the judge doesn't do it, the attorneys need to do it in their opening statement. This wasn't merely an accident. He knew there was risk. It wasn't merely negligence. He knew he was creating risk. He knows it's a real gun. He knows it's inherently dangerous. He knows if you point it at someone, they could die if the gun discharges. And he did all of that. And we're going to argue that he even pulled the trigger. That you should infer from the available evidence that not only did he point the gun, which alone is reckless by itself. None of you would just pick up a gun someone else told you was unloaded and pointed at your own head. It's not that hard to explain if you're a competent legal counsel. Yeah. All right. Well, folks, that's about all I have on the Baldwin shooting. Again, from my perspective, nothing new, nothing's changed from the days immediately following the shooting. It's all the same. The law is the same. The evidence is the same. Whatever new evidence has been developed that doesn't do anything to change the legal analysis. Alec Baldwin's shooting of Halyna Hutchins is, in my professional opinion, based on the evidence available to me, which is quite a bit at this point, involuntary, felony, reckless manslaughter, every day of the week, twice on Sundays, unambiguously. So on the legal merits, he should be charged. On the legal merits, he should be tried. On the legal merits, he should be convicted. Now, we know the first political question, whether or not to charge him at all, that's been answered. That was answered this morning. Whether or not to bring him to trial, that's a different political question. How to sentence him, if he's convicted, arguably another political question. So it would be interesting to see the actual video footage of the gun discharging. What was Alec Baldwin's demeanor in that moment? That would be very interesting to see, and I've not yet seen that. Also interesting will be the official filings of the charges now, and the actual official filings in the court proceedings as things move forward, assuming we can access that. Assuming I can access that. It's a little frustrating. Most modern courts now in America, you can go to their website and the documents are publicly available and they're hyperlinked and you click on them and you can read them, but that's not always the case. So I should mention next week, the mattress dumpster, take your swing, I doubt it, trial is starting in Texas. That's good gosh. What the heck are their names? The Millers, Michael Miller and Johnny Miller, confronted the muscle-bound, steroidish looking dude at the dumpster, got into a dispute over a mattress being left. The Millers had guns in their possession. The muscle guy got upset. Confrontation ensued. Ultimately, the Millers shot and killed the muscle guy, the victim in the case, killed him. They're charged with murder now. This is all in Texas. And that Texas court, they have a website. You can go there. They have documents listed. They're hyperlinked, but you can't actually see them. And I called the court, and I spoke to a very pleasant woman in the judge's office, and she said that's just the way they do it. They're only available, actually accessible to attorneys of record on the case, and I'm not an attorney of record. She did tell me I could contact the court clerk and see if they're willing to do anything, and I will. I'll probably call them tomorrow. The trial starts Monday. I'll call them tomorrow and see, but getting a court clerk to recode their website is probably not something that's going to happen. But I'll try. I'll make the effort. I'd like to be able to read the actual documents myself, and I'll do that in this Alec Baldwin case too, if the First Judicial District in New Mexico makes those available. So the Miller, the mattress dumpster, take your swing, I doubt it case, that starts on Monday morning, folks. And my last discussion I had with Nick Requeta, I should be on his show. We're going to live stream it over at Requeta Law rather than on Law of Self-Defense. So look for me there. I will send out an email once I know more. But the last time I talked with Nick a week or so ago, that was our plan, to live stream the trial over there. I mean, Nick's audience is 10 times more 10 times plus the size of my own on social media. So for these cases of high interest, and frankly, Nick's fun to hang out with. So I'm perfectly happy to do it over on his, I expect it'll be his Rumble channel. But as I get more details about that, I'll let you know. But you should expect to see me over on Rikaida Law for live stream coverage of that mattress dumpster, take your swing, I doubt it, trial involving Johnny Miller and Michael Miller in Texas, starting on Monday. Tomorrow, I should mention, do I still have that little sign up? I don't. For the last week or so, I've been covering the self-defense immunity hearing of Louis Casado down in Florida, who shot someone outside of a bar in Florida. On December 30th of last month, he was granted immunity by the hearing court. We spent the last week going over the video of that immunity hearing process. The hearings took place in mid-November. Immunity was granted. He won immunity from prosecution on December 30th. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time, I have joining the show as live guests the defense team, Dan Hilbert and Patrick Kanan of Kanan Law down in Florida. Those guys did an excellent job in that self-defense immunity hearing, and they've kindly agreed to come on the show tomorrow as live guests at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So I'll send out an email about that as well. Maybe YouTube will notify you. You can never trust YouTube about that kind of stuff. But if you're not on our email list, a great way to do that is to download our absolutely free Law of Self-Defense 5 Elements of Self-Defense Law cheat sheet at lawofselfdefense.com/elements. And then you'll get our emails. And of course, if you don't like the emails, you can always unsubscribe anytime you want. And then I'll make one more mention of our Saturday, April 15th, Law of Self-Defense full day advanced class. Because if you sign up for this month in January, you get 50% off the normal registration, save yourself $100. If you sign up in February, it's only 25% off. In March, it's only 10% off. In April, it's full price. So you have a full day of plain English illustrated with real-world trial cases on self-defense law, how to make yourself hard to convict if you're ever compelled to defend yourself, your family, your property from criminal predation. We only teach this class once, sometimes twice a year, folks. And the next one, the only one so far scheduled for 2023, is Saturday, April 15th. If that sounds of interest, point your browser over to lawofselfdefense.com/advanced and get your seat, get your ticket at the lowest price. And if you're into certificates, there is a certificate option for this course as well. All right. I think that is it for today, folks. So I'm going to wrap up. Remember, if you carry a gun, so you're hard to kill, so your family is hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun, so me and my family are hard to kill, then you also owe it to yourself and your family to make sure you know the law, so you're hard to convict as well. Until next time, I remain Attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.